My name is Lily Clark. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how my brother stole my identity for $50,000. He had no idea I'm a cybersecurity expert. You know that feeling when someone you love stabs you in the back? When the person who's supposed to protect you becomes the one who destroys everything you've built? That's exactly what happened to me. My own flesh and blood, my little brother Jake, used my name, my social security number, my entire identity to commit fraud. And here's the thing that'll blow your mind. He thought I'd never find out because, in his eyes, I was just his boring, unsuccessful older sister who worked behind a computer screen all day. But what Jake didn't know was that those boring days behind my computer made me one of the best digital investigators in the country. If you've ever been betrayed by someone in your family, someone you trusted with your life, drop a comment below because today I'm sharing every single detail of how I discovered the betrayal, how I investigated it, and how I made sure justice was served. Before we dive into this crazy journey, let me take you back to where it all started, the moment my entire world came crashing down. It was a regular Tuesday morning when I got a call that changed everything. I was making coffee in my small apartment, getting ready for another day of remote work, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Monica from First National Bank's fraud department. She asked if I had recently taken out a personal loan for $50,000. My heart stopped. I told her no, absolutely not. I hadn't applied for any loans in years. Monica's voice got serious, and she explained that someone had used my information to secure a large loan 3 months ago, and now the account was severely delinquent with multiple missed payments. My credit score had dropped over 200 points. I felt my hands shaking as I held the phone. Who would do this to me? Who had access to my personal information? If this story sounds familiar, or if you've ever had that sinking feeling that something's terribly wrong, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what I discovered next about who betrayed me will shock you just as much as it shocked me. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of them hurting you seemed impossible? Keep that question in mind. After I hung up with Monica, I immediately logged into my credit monitoring account with trembling fingers. There it was, clear as day, a $50,000 personal loan from First National Bank that I never authorized. The application had been submitted online using my name, my social security number, my date of birth, everything. But here's where my professional training kicked in. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. Instead, I switched into investigator mode. I requested all the documentation from the bank, the loan application, the IP address used to submit it, the email address on file, the phone number listed. While I waited for those documents, I started thinking about who could possibly have access to all my personal information. My parents? No way, they could barely use email. My friends? None of them would even know my social security number. Then a terrible thought crept into my mind, one I didn't want to believe. My little brother Jake. He had stayed with me for 2 months last year when he was between jobs. He had access to my apartment, my mail, my files, but surely not Jake. Not my own brother. When the bank documents arrived in my email 2 days later, my worst fear was confirmed. The phone number on the loan application? It was Jake's number with just 1 digit changed. The email address? It was a variation of his usual email. The IP address traced back to a coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment. My stomach turned. I felt physically sick. This wasn't some random identity thief. This was my baby brother, the kid I helped raise when our parents worked double shifts, the teenager I drove to football practice every week, the young man I let live in my home rent-free when he needed help. He had betrayed me in the worst possible way. He stole my identity, destroyed my credit, and put me in debt for $50,000 I never saw a penny of. The anger that rose in me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. But beneath that anger was something even worse. Heartbreak. How could someone I loved so much do this to me? Why would he think this was okay? And the question that kept haunting me, did he ever plan to tell me? Or was he just going to let me discover it when debt collectors started banging on my door? But that's when things took a turn he never saw coming. To understand why Jake thought he could get away with this, you need to understand how our family saw me. Growing up, I was never the golden child. Jake was the star, captain of the football team, popular, charming. Everyone loved him. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the girl who spent Friday nights coding instead of partying. When I told my family I wanted to study cybersecurity, my dad actually laughed and said, "That's not a real career, Lily. When are you going to do something important?" When I graduated and got my first job, my mom asked when I was going to find real work, like teaching or nursing, something she could brag about to her friends. Family dinners were torture. Every achievement I shared was met with polite nods, while Jake's mediocre sales job was treated like he'd won a Nobel Prize. I became invisible in my own family. So when Jake needed help, needed a place to stay, needed someone to believe in him, I was there because I understood what it felt like to be underestimated. I thought I was being a good sister. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one whose accomplishments don't matter, smash that like button and subscribe, because I'm about to show you how being underestimated became my greatest weapon. Have you ever been treated like you don't matter by the people who should love you most? That pain runs deep. Here's the twisted irony of the whole situation. While my family dismissed my career as just computer stuff, I had actually become incredibly successful. I worked as a senior cybersecurity analyst for a major tech company, specializing in digital forensics and fraud investigation. My literal job was tracking down cybercriminals, identifying security breaches, and building cases against identity thieves. I had helped law enforcement catch dozens of fraudsters. I had certifications in ethical hacking, digital forensics, and network security. Companies paid me six figures to protect their data and investigate breaches. But to my family, I was just Lily, the boring daughter who stared at computer screens all day. They had no idea what I actually did, no concept of the skills I possessed. Jake certainly didn't know. When he decided to steal my identity, he saw me as an easy target. His quiet, unsuccessful sister, who probably wouldn't even notice or wouldn't know what to do about it. He thought I was weak. He thought I was clueless. He had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life by stealing from someone who hunts people like him for a living. But knowing I had the skills to catch him didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. That night, after confirming it was Jake, I sat alone in my apartment and cried for the first time in years. I wasn't crying about the money, though $50,000 was devastating. I was crying because my little brother, the kid whose homework I helped with, whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose college application essays I edited, that person looked at me and saw someone whose life he could destroy without hesitation. What kind of person does that? What did I do to deserve such cruelty from my own blood? The questions tortured me. Did he hate me? Did he resent me for something I didn't know about? Or was I just so insignificant to him that he didn't even consider how this would affect me? I realized that maybe I never really knew Jake at all. Maybe the little brother I loved was just a version I'd created in my head, and the real Jake was someone capable of this kind of calculated betrayal. But as I wiped away my tears that night, something shifted inside me. The sadness transformed into determination. Jake wanted to play games with my identity? Fine. Let me show him what happens when you mess with someone who knows every digital footprint you've ever left. For 3 days after discovering the truth, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the crushing weight of betrayal. This wasn't a stranger who had stolen my identity. This was Marcus, my baby brother, the kid I used to protect from bullies in elementary school. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike when he was 7, staying up late to help him with homework when our parents were too busy. Every memory I had of us growing up together now felt contaminated, poisoned by the knowledge that he saw me as nothing more than a convenient victim. The person I would have done anything for had looked at me and thought I was weak enough, insignificant enough, that he could destroy my financial life and get away with it. Have you ever loved someone so much that their betrayal felt like a physical wound? If you're feeling this story deep in your soul, do me a huge favor and smash that subscribe button and like this video, because I need you with me for the journey ahead. And trust me, the revenge I planned was something he never saw coming. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $50,000 was devastating for someone like me who had worked hard for every penny I had. The worst part was realizing that Marcus had planned this, had thought about it, had looked at my life and decided I was disposable. He knew I wasn't close with our parents, knew they would probably take his side if it ever came to light. He had calculated that even if I discovered the fraud, I wouldn't have the courage or the resources to fight back against him. In his mind, I was still that invisible sister who accepted being overlooked and undervalued, the one who would probably just swallow this injustice to keep the peace in a family that had never valued her anyway. But what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly understood because he never paid attention to anything I did, was that I had spent years becoming an expert in exactly the kind of digital forensics that would unravel every lie he had told. I made a decision in those dark 3 days that would change both of our lives forever. I wasn't going to run to the police immediately, wasn't going to involve our parents or try to handle this through official channels right away. No, I was going to do what I do best. I was going to investigate every single detail of his crime, document every piece of evidence, and build a case so airtight that when I finally confronted him, he would have nowhere to run and no way to talk himself out of it. This wasn't just about getting my money back or clearing my name. This was about proving to myself and to him that I wasn't the weak, forgettable person he thought I was. I wanted him to understand that underestimating me was the biggest mistake he had ever made in his life. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very skills my family had dismissed and ignored for years were about to become the weapon I used to bring justice to the person they loved most. And I'm not going to lie, there was a dark satisfaction in knowing that Marcus had handed me the tools for his own destruction. I started my investigation the same way I would approach any cybersecurity case at work, methodically and without emotion clouding my judgment. First, I created a secure, encrypted folder on my personal computer where I would store every piece of evidence I found. I documented the timeline of events, starting with the date the loan was opened and working backward and forward from there. Using my access to specialized databases through work, which I'll admit was a gray area ethically, but I was past caring about minor rules, I pulled Marcus's financial records, his phone records, and even his email metadata. What I found was a pattern of financial desperation I hadn't known existed because we barely talked anymore. Marcus had 3 maxed-out credit cards, 2 car loans he was behind on, and had been borrowing money from friends for months before the identity theft occurred. Have you ever realized you didn't know someone at all, even though you grew up with them? The person I thought was the successful golden child was actually drowning in debt and terrible financial decisions. I traced the $50,000 from the moment it left the bank account opened in my name, following the digital breadcrumbs through multiple transfers and purchases. Marcus wasn't smart about covering his tracks, probably because he assumed no one would ever look this closely, or that I wouldn't have the skills to find him. $10,000 went to paying off one of his car loans immediately. Another $15,000 disappeared into cash withdrawals over the course of 2 months, likely used for daily expenses he couldn't otherwise afford. The remaining $25,000 was more interesting because it showed a pattern of gambling, online poker sites, and sports betting platforms that Marcus had been using regularly. I found receipts in his email for a weekend trip to Las Vegas that happened right after the loan was approved, photos on his social media showing him living a lifestyle he absolutely could not afford on his car salesman's salary. Every piece of evidence I gathered made me angrier, but also more determined, because this wasn't just theft. This was him living his best life on my stolen identity, while I worked 60-hour weeks to build a career he couldn't even pretend to respect. The technical evidence was damning enough, but I wanted more. I wanted context and motive documented so completely that there would be no ambiguity about his guilt. I managed to access the security footage from the bank through a former colleague who worked in their IT department, and watching Marcus walk into that bank wearing a suit I had never seen before, carrying forged documents with my information, it made everything horrifyingly real. I could see him smiling at the loan officer, charming her the way he had always charmed everyone in our family, playing the role of responsible borrower while committing a federal crime. I saved that footage, encrypted it, backed it up in 3 different locations because this was the smoking gun I needed. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Marcus had researched identity theft methods for weeks before executing his plan, visiting forums and websites about how to forge documents and avoid detection. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or a moment of desperation. This was premeditated, calculated, and targeted specifically at me because he knew I was the easiest mark in our family, and that realization hurt more than anything else I had discovered. While I was building my case against Marcus, something unexpected started happening inside me. I began questioning whether I could actually go through with destroying my own brother's life. Late at night, lying awake in bed, I would think about our childhood, about the few good memories we shared before everything became complicated. I remembered his 8th birthday when I saved up my allowance for 3 months to buy him the toy he desperately wanted, the way his face lit up with genuine joy and gratitude. Part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in family loyalty, kept whispering that maybe I should just confront him privately, give him a chance to make things right without involving the authorities. But then I would remember that he had looked at my life, calculated my worth, and decided I was expendable enough to commit a federal crime against, and that anger would come roaring back stronger than before. Have you ever been torn between love and justice, between family loyalty and doing what's right? If this internal struggle resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video because what I'm about to share gets even more emotionally complex, and I need you here with me to understand why I made the choices I did. The truth is, I spent 2 weeks in this emotional limbo, gathering evidence during the day and crying myself to sleep at night. I kept thinking about our parents and how this would devastate them, how they would probably blame me somehow for ruining Marcus's life, even though he was the one who committed the crime. My mom had always been protective of him, always made excuses for his mistakes, and I could already hear her voice saying I was being vindictive, that I should have just talked to him first. But talking to him wouldn't change the fact that $50,000 in debt was attached to my name, that my credit score had plummeted, that collection agencies were calling me daily with threats of legal action. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a heart-to-heart conversation over coffee. This was serious criminal activity that had real consequences for my financial future, my career, everything I had worked so hard to build. I sought advice without revealing the full situation, reaching out to a therapist I had seen years ago for help processing my feelings. She asked me a question that cut through all my confusion. If this had been done by a stranger, would you hesitate to pursue justice? The answer was immediate and clear. No, I wouldn't hesitate for a second. The fact that Marcus was family didn't make the crime less severe. It actually made it worse because he had exploited our relationship and his knowledge of my vulnerabilities. That session helped me understand that protecting Marcus from the consequences of his actions wasn't love, it was enabling, and it would only teach him that he could hurt people without accountability. I made my final decision that night. I would confront him with all the evidence I had gathered, give him one chance to confess and try to make restitution, and if he refused or tried to manipulate me, I would take everything I had found to the police and let justice take its course, no matter how much it hurt or how much our family would hate me for it. I spent days planning how to confront Marcus, scripting out different scenarios in my head, and preparing for every possible reaction he might have. I knew he would try to deny it at first. That was his pattern with everything in life: deflect, deny, and charm his way out of consequences. I also knew he might try to turn it around on me, make me feel guilty for investigating him, or accuse me of being a bad sister for not just talking to him first. So I prepared mentally and emotionally, reminding myself that I had concrete evidence, that I wasn't crazy or vindictive, that I was simply holding someone accountable for a serious crime they had committed against me. I printed out copies of all the key evidence, the bank security footage screenshots, the financial transaction records, the phone data, everything organized in a folder that I could present to him in an undeniable way. Do you know what it feels like to prepare for a conversation that will change everything forever? My hands were shaking the entire time I was organizing that folder, because I knew that once I confronted him, there was no going back. Our relationship and our family dynamics would never be the same. I chose to meet him at a coffee shop near his apartment, a public place where he couldn't make a scene or try to intimidate me, somewhere neutral where we could talk without interruption. I texted him asking if we could meet up, saying I wanted to catch up since it had been a while, keeping my tone casual so he wouldn't suspect anything. He agreed easily, probably thinking this was just another family obligation he could breeze through without really engaging. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept, running through everything I wanted to say, imagining his face when he realized I knew exactly what he had done. Part of me hoped he would immediately confess and show genuine remorse, that maybe there was still some good in him that could be salvaged. But another part of me, the part that had seen all the evidence of his premeditation and calculation, knew better than to expect anything resembling accountability from someone who had already proven he saw me as nothing more than a convenient target. When the day arrived, I got to the coffee shop 30 minutes early, choosing a table in the back corner where we would have privacy, but still be visible to other customers. I ordered a coffee I couldn't drink because my stomach was in knots, my heart racing so fast I thought everyone around me could hear it. The folder with all the evidence sat in my bag, every page organized and ready to present in devastating detail. I kept reminding myself why I was doing this, not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because what Marcus had done was wrong and had real consequences that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. When he finally walked in, looking completely relaxed and unsuspecting, flashing that charming smile he used on everyone, I felt a cold determination settle over me. This was it. The moment where I would either reclaim my power and my life, or I would back down and accept being the invisible, victimized sister forever. And I already knew which version of myself I was choosing to be. Marcus sat down across from me with that easy, confident smile he always wore, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. He started with small talk, asking about work in that dismissive way he always did, not really listening to my answers, just filling space with words until he could talk about himself. I let him go on for about 5 minutes, watching him perform this routine of fake brotherly concern, and then I cut him off mid-sentence and said the words I had been rehearsing for days. Marcus, I know you stole my identity and took out a $50,000 loan in my name. The color drained from his face instantly, his smile freezing in place like a mask that had suddenly cracked. For a moment, there was complete silence between us, just the background noise of the coffee shop and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Have you ever watched someone's entire world collapse in real time? If you're on the edge of your seat right now, please subscribe and like this video, because what happened next was even more shocking than I expected. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this confrontation unfolded. His first reaction was exactly what I predicted. Denial, swift and automatic, his face shifting from shock to defensive anger in seconds. "What are you talking about? That's insane, Lily. Why would I do something like that?" He tried to laugh it off, tried to make it seem like I was being paranoid or crazy, but his voice was shaking and his hands were gripping his coffee cup so tight his knuckles turned white. I didn't argue with him, didn't get emotional or raise my voice. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, sliding it across the table toward him. I told him to open it, to look at the bank security footage screenshot on the first page, the one showing him clear as day, walking into that bank 6 months ago. I watched his face as he opened the folder, watched the moment the reality of his situation hit him, the realization that he hadn't gotten away with it, that I knew everything. He tried several different tactics over the next 20 minutes, each one more desperate than the last, and I had prepared myself for all of them. First, he tried to minimize it, saying it wasn't that big a deal, that he was planning to pay it back before I ever found out, that he had just been in a tight spot financially. When I pointed out that he had been making no payments and the debt was destroying my credit, he switched to victimhood, talking about how much pressure he was under, how our parents expected so much from him, how he didn't know what else to do. I almost felt sorry for him in that moment, almost let that old pattern of protecting him kick in, but then I remembered the evidence I had found of him researching identity theft methods for weeks, remembered that this was calculated and premeditated, not some desperate impulse. Finally, when nothing else worked, he tried anger, accusing me of being a terrible sister for investigating him instead of just talking to him, saying I was tearing the family apart over money. That's when I lost my composure for the first and only time during the confrontation, leaning forward and telling him in a voice I barely recognized as my own that he tore our family apart the moment he decided I was worthless enough to victimize, and now he was going to face the consequences of that choice whether he liked it or not. After Marcus exhausted all his deflection tactics, I gave him my ultimatum, the one chance I had decided he deserved despite everything he had done. I told him he had two options. He could go to our parents with me right now, confess everything he had done, and work out a plan to pay back every single penny, plus all the fees and credit damage he had caused. Or I would take all the evidence I had gathered directly to the police and let them handle it through the criminal justice system. I made it clear that if he chose the first option, I would hold off on pressing charges as long as he made consistent payments and showed genuine effort to make things right. But the moment he missed a payment or tried to manipulate the situation, I would go to the authorities with everything I had. The look on his face was something between terror and disbelief, like he couldn't quite process that his invisible sister, the one he had always dismissed and underestimated, was sitting across from him holding all the power. Have you ever had to choose between mercy and justice, knowing that either choice would change you forever? I gave him 24 hours to decide, standing up from the table and leaving him sitting there with the folder of evidence, walking out of that coffee shop feeling both powerful and completely devastated. Those 24 hours were the longest of my entire life, every minute stretching out like an eternity as I waited to see what choice Marcus would make. Part of me hoped he would do the right thing, that he would show some shred of character and take responsibility for his actions by confessing to our parents and committing to making restitution. But another part of me, the part that had seen how thoroughly he had planned and executed this crime, knew that he would probably try to find some way to manipulate the situation or turn our parents against me. I kept my phone close, jumping every time it buzzed with a notification, wondering if it would be Marcus calling to accept my terms, or if I would just hear silence until the deadline passed. I had already prepared a packet for the police with copies of all my evidence, organized and ready to submit the moment I made that decision. The waiting was agony because I knew that either outcome would be painful. Either I would send my own brother to prison, or I would have to spend years watching him pay back this debt while our family dynamic became even more toxic and strained. When the 24 hours were almost up, Marcus finally called, and I could hear in his voice that he had been crying. He asked if we could meet at our parents' house, said he wanted to tell them together, and for a brief moment I felt a surge of hope that maybe he had actually chosen to do the right thing. But when I arrived at our parents' house an hour later, I realized I had been naive to expect anything genuine from him. Marcus had gotten there first, and had already started telling our parents his version of events, a twisted narrative where he was the victim of circumstances, and I was the vengeful sister trying to destroy him over a misunderstanding. I walked into the living room to find my mother crying, and my father looking at me with disappointment and anger, and I knew in that moment that Marcus had chosen his path, and now I would have to choose mine. He had tried to manipulate them first, tried to control the narrative before I could present the truth, and that final betrayal, that last attempt to paint me as the villain in a story where he was the criminal, made my decision crystal clear. I didn't let Marcus finish his manipulated version of the story. I simply opened my bag and pulled out the evidence folder, placing it on the coffee table in front of our parents with a calm I didn't actually feel inside. I told them the truth from beginning to end. The phone call from the collections agency, the investigation I conducted using my cybersecurity skills, the bank security footage showing Marcus committing the fraud, and the timeline of how he had spent the $50,000 on his debts and gambling habits. My mother kept shaking her head in disbelief, looking between Marcus and me like she couldn't decide which version to believe, while my father sat in silence, his face growing darker as I presented each piece of evidence. Marcus tried to interrupt several times, tried to spin it as a misunderstanding or claim I had somehow manipulated the evidence, but every time he spoke, I calmly showed another document, another screenshot, another undeniable proof of his guilt. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have believed you from the start? If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to fight for the truth when everyone doubted you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video right now, because what comes next is the moment everything changed, and I need you here with me to see how justice finally prevailed. When I finished presenting all the evidence, there was a heavy silence in the room that felt like it lasted forever. My mother was crying, but not the way I expected. She wasn't rushing to comfort Marcus or defend him anymore. She was staring at him with a look of horror and betrayal. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet and controlled in a way that was somehow more devastating than yelling would have been, asking Marcus if everything I had shown them was true. Marcus tried one more time to deflect, to minimize, to make excuses, but this time my father cut him off and demanded a yes or no answer. The moment Marcus whispered yes, something shifted in that room. The golden child image they had built around him for so many years finally shattered completely. I waited for them to ask me what I wanted to do, to involve me in the decision about how to handle this family crisis, but instead my mother looked at me and said something I will never forget. She asked me not to go to the police, to handle this privately within the family, to think about what this would do to Marcus's future. That request, that prioritization of Marcus's future over the crime he had committed against me, was the final confirmation I needed that I was making the right choice. I stood up, looked at my parents, and told them with absolute clarity that I was going to the police the next morning, that Marcus had made his choice when he tried to manipulate them against me instead of taking responsibility, and that I would not be protecting him from the consequences of his actions anymore. My mother started to argue, started to plead with me to reconsider, but my father put his hand on her arm and told her to stop, that I had every right to do what I was about to do. I walked out of that house for what I knew might be the last time, feeling a strange mix of grief and liberation, knowing that I was choosing myself, my integrity, and my future over a family that had never truly valued me. The next morning, I walked into the police station with my folder of evidence, filed a formal report for identity theft and fraud, and set in motion a chain of events that would finally hold Marcus accountable for destroying my financial life for his own selfish gain. The legal process moved faster than I expected once the police saw the comprehensive evidence I had gathered. Within 2 weeks, Marcus was formally arrested and charged with identity theft, fraud, and multiple related felonies that carried serious prison time. The detective assigned to my case told me that my documentation and digital forensics work had made their job incredibly easy, that most identity theft cases take months to build, but mine was essentially prosecution ready from day one. Watching Marcus being led away in handcuffs was surreal. This person I had grown up with, had loved and protected, now facing the criminal justice system because of his own choices and my refusal to be a victim anymore. My parents stopped speaking to me entirely after his arrest, my mother leaving voicemails calling me vindictive and cruel, saying I had destroyed our family over money when I could have just worked it out privately. Do you know what it's like to do the right thing and still be treated like the villain? But for the first time in my life, their disapproval didn't devastate me, because I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice, that protecting Marcus from consequences would have only enabled more destructive behavior. The trial took place 4 months later, and I had to testify about the investigation I conducted and the evidence I had gathered. Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as obsessive and vindictive, someone who had used her technical skills to go after her brother instead of handling things like family, but the evidence spoke louder than any narrative they could spin. The prosecution presented the bank security footage, the financial records, the timeline of Marcus's research into identity theft methods, all the meticulous documentation I had compiled. Marcus took a plea deal before the jury even finished deliberations, accepting a sentence of 3 years in prison with restitution requirements for the full amount he had stolen plus damages. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up and spoke directly to Marcus for the first time since that confrontation at my parents' house, telling him that I didn't hate him, but that he needed to understand that actions have consequences, and that family doesn't mean accepting abuse or criminal behavior. The aftermath was complicated and painful in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, even though I knew it was coming. My extended family took sides, some supporting my decision to prosecute, while others echoed my parents' view that I should have handled it privately. I lost relationships with cousins and aunts and uncles who believed family loyalty meant protecting criminals, but I also gained a sense of self-respect and personal power I had never experienced before. The bank eventually cleared my name and removed the fraudulent loan from my credit report, though it took almost a year of legal paperwork and disputes. Marcus served 18 months of his 3-year sentence before being released on parole, and to this day we have never spoken again, and I'm okay with that because some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive or forget. My career actually benefited from the experience in an unexpected way. My company promoted me after learning about the complex investigation I had conducted, recognizing my skills in a way my family never had, and I eventually started consulting on identity theft cases for law enforcement, using my experience to help other victims get justice. The first year after the trial was the hardest period of personal growth I've ever experienced, filled with therapy sessions where I unpacked decades of feeling invisible and undervalued. I had to learn how to build my identity separate from my family's perception of me, to recognize that my worth wasn't determined by whether they celebrated my achievements or acknowledged my pain. My therapist helped me understand that being the scapegoat in my family wasn't about anything I had done wrong. It was about dynamics that existed long before I was old enough to understand them. I started building a chosen family of friends and colleagues who valued me for who I actually was, not for the role I was supposed to play in someone else's narrative. The loneliness was real and sometimes overwhelming, especially during holidays when I would see social media posts of families together and feel that ache of what I had lost. But I also felt a freedom I had never experienced before, the freedom to be myself without constantly trying to earn approval that was never going to come. I threw myself into my work and my personal development, taking on more challenging projects at my company, and eventually becoming the lead cybersecurity analyst for our entire division. The skills I had used to catch Marcus became the foundation for a specialty in digital forensics that made me invaluable to my organization. I started speaking at industry conferences about identity theft prevention and investigation techniques, sharing my story in professional contexts to help others understand the real-world impact of these crimes. Each time I spoke publicly about what happened, it felt like reclaiming another piece of my power, transforming my trauma into expertise that could help protect other people from experiencing what I went through. I also started volunteering with a nonprofit that helps identity theft victims navigate the legal and financial recovery process, using my experience to guide others through the overwhelming aftermath of having their lives stolen by someone they trusted. The healing wasn't linear, and there were setbacks along the way, moments when I would doubt whether I had made the right choice in prosecuting Marcus. I would wonder if maybe I could have found another way, if maybe I had been too harsh, if maybe our relationship could have been salvaged if I had just handled things differently. But then I would remember the bank's security footage, the evidence of premeditation, the way he tried to manipulate our parents against me even after being caught, and I would know that I had made the only choice that preserved my integrity and self-respect. I learned that you can love someone and still hold them accountable, that family loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse or criminal behavior, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their actions. My life became richer and more authentic without the constant weight of trying to fit into a family system that had never had space for the real me, and I started to understand that losing people who didn't value you isn't actually a loss, it's a liberation. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized this experience fundamentally changed how I understand justice, family, and personal worth in ways I'm still processing years later. The revenge I got wasn't the dramatic, satisfying moment you see in movies where the villain gets their comeuppance and everyone cheers. It was messy and painful and cost me relationships I had spent my whole life trying to maintain. But it was also necessary because letting Marcus get away with what he did would have destroyed something essential in me, some core sense of self-worth that I couldn't afford to lose. What would you have done in my place? And do you think I made the right choice? If this story has made you think differently about family loyalty, justice, or standing up for yourself, I need you to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button right now. Because sharing these difficult stories is how we help each other navigate impossible situations, and your engagement tells me that this content matters to you. The biggest lesson I learned is that being underestimated can actually be your greatest advantage if you know how to use it strategically. Marcus saw me as weak and forgettable, someone who wouldn't have the skills or courage to fight back, and that miscalculation was his downfall. The family that ignored my achievements and dismissed my career gave me the space to develop expertise they didn't even know existed. And when the moment came to defend myself, I had tools they couldn't comprehend or counter. There's a kind of power in being underestimated, in letting people think you're less capable than you are while you're actually building skills and knowledge that will serve you when it matters most. I don't recommend seeking out that position. Being dismissed and undervalued hurts in ways that leave lasting scars. But if you find yourself there, know that you can transform that pain into strength and use it to protect yourself when necessary. I also learned that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, and sometimes justice leaves you feeling empty rather than triumphant. I thought that holding Marcus accountable would give me closure, that seeing him face consequences would heal the wound of his betrayal, but the truth is more complicated than that. What it gave me instead was self-respect, the knowledge that when someone violated my boundaries and tried to destroy my life, I didn't back down or accept it. I fought back with everything I had and refused to be a victim. That self-respect has been worth more than any relationship I lost in the process, because it's the foundation for every healthy relationship and success I've built since then. Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace, or does it just feed more anger? For me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to let someone get away with hurting me just because we shared DNA. And that distinction matters because it means I can look at myself in the mirror and know I acted with integrity even when it cost me everything I thought I wanted. After hearing my story, I want you to ask yourself some hard questions about your own life and relationships. Are there people who take advantage of your kindness because they think you won't fight back? Are you accepting treatment from family members that you would never tolerate from strangers? Sometimes we stay in toxic dynamics because we're afraid of being alone or being seen as the bad person. But what I learned is that being alone is better than being with people who don't value you. And being seen as the bad person by people who enable abuse is actually a badge of honor. The truth is that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up for you, who respects your boundaries, and who celebrates your victories instead of dismissing them. I lost the family I was born into, but I gained a life built on my own terms where my worth isn't up for debate. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: your skills, your knowledge, and your integrity are yours, and nobody can take them away from you no matter how much they underestimate or dismiss you. When Marcus stole my identity, he thought he was taking advantage of someone powerless, but what he actually did was wake up someone who had been sleepwalking through family dynamics that didn't serve her. The cybersecurity expertise that my family ignored became the weapon I used to defend myself and reclaim my life, and that irony isn't lost on me. Whatever skills you're developing right now, whatever passions you're pursuing that others don't understand or value, keep investing in yourself because you never know when those abilities will be exactly what you need to save yourself. I want to end by saying that if you're going through something similar, if someone has betrayed your trust or stolen from you, or taken advantage of your kindness, you have the right to protect yourself and seek justice, even if it's uncomfortable or unpopular. Don't let anyone guilt you into accepting abuse in the name of family loyalty or keeping the peace, because that peace comes at the cost of your self-respect and your future. Document everything. Trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to use whatever legal or professional resources you have access to defend yourself. And if you want more stories like this, stories about people who fought back against betrayal and injustice and refused to be victims, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I'll be sharing more of these journeys, and I want you here with me for every single one. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, being underestimated is only a weakness if you believe it yourself.